Okay, so this is a short presentation on TU 155, the Higher Diploma in Clinical Measurement Science. This is a graduate entry programme offered by TU Dublin. The presentation will focus on three things. First, the profession of clinical measurement science, what it's about, what the disciplines, sub-disciplines are within it. Then we look at the programme structure. Then we look at the application process, and finally answer any questions that you might have. So within clinical measurement science, there are four sub-disciplines, namely cardiac physiology, vascular physiology, respiratory physiology, and neurophysiology. And in the general sense, a clinical measurement scientist's role is generally within the hospital system, both in the public HSE hospitals, in voluntary hospitals, and also in the private sector. So every hospital will have a team of diagnostic physiologists in these disciplines. And the individuals employed in these roles will carry out diagnostic testing on patients. Patients can be inpatients or outpatients. They will be then required to analyse the diagnostic results received and feed them back to the medical team that's looking after the patient within the hospital system. So to just look a little bit at each of those in turn, and it's really only a headline look at them. So the first one is cardiac physiology. And some of the testing, some of the diagnostic tests that are administered by cardiac physiologists are ECG, stress testing, Holter monitoring, loop recorders. A loop recorder is an implanted device in an individual where they are suffering cardiac episodes, but that they haven't been captured in the hospital setting, so that they can be analysed and understood with a view to determining a treatment plan for a patient. And cardiac physiologists will monitor these. The patient has the loop recorder implanted, and in some cases the data from them is transmitted on a daily or weekly basis to the hospital, and they're reviewed. They could also be monitoring Holters, 24-hour BP results. The more advanced cardiac physiologists will work in the cath lab. So a patient who may be having stents fitted following a heart attack, or some, a concern about narrowing of arteries, is monitored during the procedure in terms of their cardiac function and cardiac output, and the clinical measurement cardiac physiologist will be in the cath lab undertaking that monitoring process. Echo is a very important part of cardiac physiology, and there are two types of echo. And echo is using ultrasound imaging to image the heart and the structures within it. For example, the valves, the different chambers of the heart, the positioning of the arteries and the veins, etc. So it can be transthoracic, and that's where the ultrasound is done on the chest of the individual, or in some instances it can be transesophageal, where there's a specialised ultrasound probe that is inserted via the throat, and it gets a different imaging view of the heart. They're looking at the heart from on top, so different views can be obtained. A lot of the work of a cardiac physiologist is about diagnosing issues that have arisen for a person's cardiac function and reporting on it. So for example, if somebody has had a heart attack, it can have affected different parts of the heart, different sections. It could be, left or right or back or front, or, could affect different parts of the heart in different ways. And the job of the clinical measurement physiologist is to determine what parts are affected and report on that, so a treatment plan can be put in place. A vascular physiologist uses ultrasound quite a bit, so they might be looking at carotid artery ultrasound using duplex ultrasound scanning. So the carotid artery is the two arteries that come up left and right of your neck, and then it bifurcates or splits. And at that bifurcation joint, there can be a buildup of plaque that can cause turbulent blood flow. The turbulent blood flow and the buildup of plaque can be detected using carotid artery scanning, using ultrasound. And difficulties that people might have in relation to plaque buildup at the carotid artery is, can lead to stroke and difficulties like that. So from that point of view, carotid artery scanning is actually a very important technique. They would also use ultrasound scanning to detect the likes of AAA or abdominal aortic aneurysms or peripheral arterial disease that mainly affects the legs. They would be looking at things like ankle brachial indexes, where you're looking at differential blood pressures. So you'd be looking at blood pressures at different points in the body, and that can give information that's key to some diagnosis, or segmental analysis. In the case of respiratory physiology, it could involve things like plasmography, where lung function testing, looking at the volume of the lungs, the capacity of the lungs, the elasticity of the lungs, the ability for gas exchange, the ability to inspire and expire, the efficiency of doing that. We can look at the lung function as a function of exercise testing, looking at the mechanics of respiration, looking at sleep studies where people have issues relating to sleep. So all of those are part of the discipline of respiratory physiology. Finally, the last discipline within this program is neurophysiology, and the real cornerstone of neurophysiology is the EEG, and that looks at the electrical activity of the brain. It can be used to determine the focus, for example, of somebody who is suffering from epilepsy. It can also, we also use neurophysiology will also look at nerve conduction studies. They'll be involved in intraoperative monitoring. So for example, a person undergoing spinal surgery will have a neurophysiologist present in the operating theatre monitoring the integrity of the spinal cord during the procedure, as surgeons are operating in quite a sensitive part of the body. And that's a key role of a neurophysiologist. They'll also be looking at evoked potentials. So for example, what are the things that can trigger electrical activity in the brain? So that's a really small, short view of the four disciplines of of clinical measurement science. I suppose the thing that ties them all together is it is a diagnostic service within the hospitals. And if you think about what's happening, you have a human with some sort of condition. You then have very sophisticated technology that you're attaching to them in order to diagnose or to measure or to determine some aspect of the functioning of whatever system it is you're looking at. So if you think about what's needed in order to be good at that, we need to understand the person, their anatomy and their physiology. We need to understand the disease and some of the disease pathologies and how diseases can impact on each other when they're both present or more than one is present in a person at the same time. We also then have the technology side. So it's really important that clinical physiologists understand the technology that they're using in the diagnostic process. And then the third thing that's important is the whole area of pharmacology, because, for example, a person with cystic fibrosis or COPD or asthma, for example, that is undergoing lung function tests, or maybe even a patient suffering from long COVID in the current climate, will have certain medications that will be affecting, hopefully helping their lung function. And it's important to understand the pharmacology of the whole range of medications that a person might be taking, so you understand their impact on the diagnostic results that you receive or that you come up with. So an outline of the program. This is a 2-year program. In stage 1, we focus in semester 1 on medical instrumentation and imaging. And this speaks to one of the parts of the expertise that we spoke about there a moment ago. So this is really about instrumentation, about the physics that makes instrumentation work. So for example, when we attach an electrode to a patient, when we're doing an EEG, looking at their heart function, the electrical activity of their heart, we need to understand how to connect that appropriately, so we're not introducing any resistive bridges or any difficulty with the electrical connections. We need to understand the instruments. We need to understand how to get the best out of the instruments. So medical instrumentation and imaging is done in semester 1, as is pharmacology, as is an introduction to clinical measurement science and disease pathology. And then in January, then you commence placement, and you will undergo placement in 2 modules, either cardiac, respiratory, vascular, or neurophysiology. You will do 2 of those. You call one of them is your major discipline and one is your minor discipline. In the first year of the program, in your major discipline, you do 14 weeks of placement, and in your minor discipline, you do 8. So just an idea of how year 1 works. Semester 1 is blended learning. Some material is delivered on campus. A good deal of it is delivered remotely. Generally speaking, we try to let students know what 2 days in the week they'll be required on site in TU Dublin. And so, for example, last year, I think it was Tuesday and Wednesday, and students weren't required every Tuesday and Wednesday, but a good number of Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So from that point of view, and then the other days are fairly full in terms of online lectures. You have exams in December usually, but it could be January, and then you go out in placement after Christmas. So January, that should say January to the end of February, January to the end of June, you're in placement. So you're hospital based, and you have tutorials that are either online or in TU Dublin, and you have exams in May. So just so you understand placement in the first year, the first placement is the beginning of January to the end of February. That's an 8-week placement. Placement 2 is early March to the end of April. That's an 8-week placement. And then whichever of these 2 disciplines is your major discipline, you undertake 6 weeks placement post-exams from mid-May to the end of June. Then into stage 2. And we do some modules in advanced medical measurements, and this is building on the medical instrumentation. We have a further module in pharmacology, again building on the first year pharmacology. And you then have you'll choose one discipline you'll have as your major and one as your minor. So these are all done up to Christmas, and you have exams in January. You then head out in placement at the end of January, the beginning of February, for a period of 12 to 14 weeks. And during that time, you undertake your final year project during that placement. And then in May, you have exams in both of your clinical disciplines. So looking at the entry requirements, a BSc Honours in Science or a related area is required with a minimum of a 2-2. I would have to say that all of the students who joined us last year had at least a 2-1, and we found that that was necessary, but the minimum requirement is a 2-2 in a science degree. That science degree, and this is really important, must include some of the fundamental sciences. So you must have met physics, chemistry and biology and mathematics at least at year 1 level, and at year 2 or year 3 level you must have some advanced modules in anatomy or physiology. Because we don't include anatomy and physiology in this program, we assume that you're taking with you your advanced anatomy and physiology from your undergraduate degree. As a result of that, generally speaking, a person, say for example with a law degree or an arts degree, isn't really going to meet the requirements for a program like this. It has to really be a science degree. Each applicant is scored according to the classification of their degree, whether they have a first class honours, a 2-1, 2-2, etc. the ECTS credits they have in the introductory sciences, in mathematics and in anatomy and physiology, and any postgraduate experience they might have either through programs of study or through work-related experience. And candidates may be invited to interview. Last year we did interview candidates, and we do expect the same this year. Not all candidates will be interviewed. We will shortlist if necessary. Applicants, now this is really important, applicants must provide transcripts from all years of the study and verification of their degree award classification in their previous degrees, and you must include that with your application. Applications that do not include that documentation will not be considered. And that's because if we have to be going back and forward to applicants asking for documents, it can take weeks to get them back. So any application that's not full, including transcripts, simply will not be considered further. That information is on the website and has been on the website since about 18 months ago. So we really are going to stick to that, and we did last year. And as a result, some people were not considered. So please do pay attention to that. We will make offers usually in May, and each offer of a place in the programme will be made with an allocated major and minor discipline and the provisional details of where you'll be placed for the first year of study. The reason we need to do this is we need to match students to requirements of the hospitals where there are placement opportunities available, and also the employment needs of the sector. And so we consult with the profession and with the HSE and with the hospital sector generally to see what is required. And I'll just show you an example of the offer that's made. So you will get a letter if you're successful, and it will tell you what we have designated your major discipline to be and your minor discipline. In this case, it's cardiac and physiology. You will be told where your 3 placements are, the start and end dates of each one. These were the dates for the group that are in first year now. You'll be told provisionally what hospital each one will be in. And you can see in this case, this person's major discipline is cardiac. So they do 8 weeks in placement B and a further 6 weeks in placement C. And they do 8 weeks in their minor discipline. So it's, when you accept the place, you're accepting a place in the course, you're also accepting your assigned major and minor discipline, and you're accepting the hospitals that you've been given. This piece here is really important. The allocation of placement is complicated and involves a very large number of students, not just the students in this programme. We need to secure upwards of 160 clinical measurement science placements per year, and that's a huge number. It is the role of the practice education coordinator alone to communicate with hospitals in relation to placements. And please hear this bit properly. You are not permitted under any circumstances to contact any hospital in relation to placement, and any applicant found to have done this will not be permitted to proceed with the programme. On occasion, we've had students approaching hospitals and saying, I'd like to come to you to do my vascular placement. The hospitals do not want you doing it, and we don't either, because it causes utter confusion. And we really are serious. Any applicant that's found to have done that will not be permitted to proceed with the programme. So just to reiterate the point, you'll be allocated a major discipline and a minor discipline, and allocated provisional hospitals. The reason we say it's provisional placement locations is on occasion, not often, but now and again it happens that a hospital will commit to taking a student and then at short notice say, unfortunately, we're now not able to do it. They might have lost a staff member, or they might have somebody who's gone on maternity leave or a career break, or they might be moving location, or something might happen that they can't take a student at the last minute. So the disciplines are fixed and hospital locations are provisional, but generally speaking, they won't change. Making your application, you can make your application if you go to the TU Dublin website, click on study, postgrad, and then type in TU155, or even just type in clinical measurement science, and it will come up. The link is there. I realise it's quite a long link. And that's just reiterating the point about transcripts being required at the point of application. We had set a deadline of the 31st of March, that's today. And the reason it's an early deadline is because we have to sort all the applicants, and we've quite a number at this stage. We have to invite to interview, we have to interview, we then have to engage with hospitals in terms of finding placements, allocating major and minor disciplines, sending out the offers, and we tried to do that in May, it might be early June. And there's quite a short, a 2-week window for you to accept your place in the course or not, bearing in mind that when you accept the place, you're accepting your disciplines and you're accepting your placement locations. And because if you're not accepting it, then we will have a reserve list of candidates to move on to. Okay. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm very happy to take questions now, or my email address is there, siobhan.daly@tudublin.ie, and I'm very happy to take questions that way either. So I think I've stopped sharing. I have. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. What I would say, just bear in mind that this webinar is being recorded, so your question will also be recorded.
Can you influence anyway what 2 minor or major disciplines you're awarded? Or is it
quite honestly, the answer to that is no. Now, I would say that because we need to work with the hospital system in terms of what types of graduates they need currently. What I would say is at interview, we do ask shortlisted candidates if they had free rein, what would they choose? And we do, I'm not saying we cannot promise to facilitate that.
Yeah.
But we do try. And we haven't always succeeded, I need to say.
Yes. Yeah.
But we do try.
Great.
Yeah, we do try.
That's great. The only other, I don't want to take up time. The only other question is, can you influence the region in where your clinical placements are? Some students may be from up north and others from south.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the truth. Students are scattered all over the country for sure. And I've already looked at applications that are already in, and they are scattered all over the country for sure. Again, it is exactly the same situation. So we will ask, if you had a choice, where would you like to go?
Yeah.
And I would say that we're definitely not able to accommodate that. So the example I showed there was actually somebody's offer, but I took their name off it, obviously. And that person, if you notice, that person did one of their placements in the Mater Private Hospital in Cork, and they did their other 2 placements in the Mater Private Hospital in Dublin. So that person, I mean, I don't know where they live. I can't even remember whose offer letter this was, but inevitably they were traveling for at least one of them.
Okay.
So, but we do try. One of the things that is, it's nearly easier for us to place people outside of Dublin. Nearly, not always, nearly. And the other thing that influences where people are placed is, so a person might be from Donegal and there's a hospital in Letterkenny, and they might say, I'd really love to do vascular and I'd really love to do it in Letterkenny.
Yes.
Now, I don't know whether Letterkenny offers vascular diagnostics or not, but it may be the case that where they ask for it doesn't actually offer the required diagnostics, or it may be that the hospital does offer the diagnostic suite that we're looking for, but doesn't have the breadth of diagnostic tests. So some smaller hospitals will have a cardiac testing facility, but it might be restricted to ECG and Holters and, you know, that kind of thing. So from that point of view, we won't send somebody to a hospital if they're not going to get the full experience that's required, if that makes sense. But certainly at interview, we ask, and we do try, but I can tell you we do not always succeed. As I said in the earlier part of the presentation, we could have upwards of 160 placements to organise in a year. And if each student is saying, well, I'd really like to be in Limerick, or I'd really like to be in Galway, or I'd really like to be in Waterford, you know, it just becomes impossible.
Of course.
But we do try.
That's all. It's okay.
No problem, James. Any other questions?
I presume if you're invited to interview, it's towards the end of April.
Yes, it would be towards the end of April, and interviews will be online.
Oh, yeah, good.
Yeah, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot in the context of COVID. I mean, inevitably, we don't want people traveling that don't need to travel for lots of reasons. COVID being just one of them. But the other reason, I mean, environmentally, if we don't need to travel, we shouldn't, you know.
Okay.
So interviews will be held online. Yeah. Okay, so I think I'm going to sign off unless there's any final questions.